Dark Souls 2. Oh boy. When talking about Dark Souls 2, I feel like it's important to point out the fact that it isn't a bad game by any means. As a matter of fact, I'd go as far as to say that it's a good game, great even. I personally like the game's approach to level design, and while the boss runs were often rage-inducing, I found the bosses themselves very enjoyable. Dark Souls 2 suffers a lot from the fact that it's very different and in a lot of ways worse than its predecessor and its successor Dark Souls 3. In terms of combat, level design, and story, Dark Souls 2 strays far from the formula the original game and its predecessors created. So in this video, I'm going to explain the interesting development history of Dark Souls 2 and the main problems I and many others have with this game. Also like and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1k subs before 2025. To fully understand the development of Dark Souls 2, I first need to talk about the development of a different FromSoft game, with that being Bloodborne. In 2013, Sony announced a partnership with FromSoft for a PS4 exclusive game, and the development of this game began around this time, with Miyazaki, the main guy behind the original Dark Souls, taking the role of lead director. Dark Souls 2 also began development around this time, but it had very little involvement from Miyazaki for two main reasons. The first being that he was busy with the development of Bloodborne, and the second being that he didn't want to stifle the creativity of the two new lead directors, Yui Tanimura and Tomohiro Shibuya. I did not pronounce those names right. Development of DS2 then continued until around halfway into development when the higher-ups decided that the direction that Dark Souls 2 was taking was shit and kicked Shibuya from the project. Now Tanimura, as the sole director of the game, had to restart the development cycle as the entire world and narrative of the game would have to be rewritten. A lot of models and characters had to be remade entirely, and old assets had to be reworked and stitched into the game, and production would continue this way until the eventual release of the game. The troubled development of the game, mixed with the fact that it was essentially developed by the B team as the main team was working on Bloodborne, are the main reasons as to why Dark Souls 2 is the way it is. That leads me to the next section of this video. What makes this game so bad? While there are some story complaints, the main critiques I have about this game are directed at its gameplay. Starting with the combat, Dark Souls 2 took a very interesting approach to its combat and its gameplay, and the first of these that I'll be talking about is your character's dead zones. In almost every Soulsborne and Souls-like game, your character has 360 directional movement. This allows your character to run, roll, and attack in every direction, which almost seems like a necessity in games as challenging as Soulsborne games. Dark Souls 2, however, says fuck that and only gives you 8 directions when you're playing on a controller. This means that when you're using a joystick, there are dead zones in between these 8 directions. The 8 directional movement is somewhat of a controversial topic, with some people thinking it's fine and even better than movement in other Soulsborne games. I personally disagree, but I guess I can see where they're coming from. Once you get over the jankiness of the movement and get used to it, it stops being a prevalent problem, but there was more than a couple times when I get hit by an attack that I would have dodged if not for the 8 directional movement. The next problem in this game, however, is something that I think most people will agree with. Adaptability. Who the fuck thought this was a good idea? Adaptability is an attribute in Dark Souls 2 that determines your character's agility, poise, and status effect resistances, among other things. None of that matters though. What makes adaptability so dumb is how it determines your character's rolling. Using Dark Souls 3 as an example, when you roll, it gives you a certain amount of invincibility frames, meaning that if an enemy attacks you and you time it correctly, you can roll away and not take damage, even if the enemy hits you. This is one of the core mechanics of Soulsborne games, with it almost being a defining feature of them. DS2's approach to invincibility frames is making them an upgradable stat, and I fucking hate this. I hate this as I feel like it overcomplicated part of what is already a complicated genre of game, and it adds customization to something that doesn't need it. One thing I love about Soulsborne games is the customization the game gives you when it comes to your playstyle, and part of that comes from how it lets you distribute souls into your attributes. But bro, I feel like this isn't one of the things that needs to be controlled by the player, or at least not to the extent that it is in this game. I feel like Dark Souls 3 controls rolling perfectly with the equip load and weight. If your weight is over 70% of your maximum load, then you roll slower than normal, but it doesn't add that much of a difference to your invincibility frames. And if your weight is over 100%, then you can't roll or sprint. I feel like this is very understandable and stops players with strong armor from being able to overuse rolls due to the weight of their armor. It almost forces players to commit to a specific playstyle as opposed to trying to take advantage of multiple playstyles, which I see as a benefit. Yes, I do know that Dark Souls 2 has the same weight and equip load system, but it also has upgradable invincibility frames, so it kind of ruined it. But yeah, I'm sure there's some weirdos and contrarians that love adaptability, but like, we both know that shit is ass, bro. Stop lying to yourself. Another problem that Dark Souls 2 suffers from is the gank squads, and if you've ever played this game before, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. In Dark Souls 2, there are so many areas of this game where large groups of enemies will just assault you, making it almost impossible for you to fight back or escape. I feel like DS2's enemy placement was designed in such a way to stop players from running around haphazardly and attacking enemies without thought, and was trying to force you to be more methodical in your attack. And in some areas this does work, but in a lot of areas it just doesn't. It's like once you get the attention from one enemy, the rest of them just swarm you because of how big their radar is. The reason I dislike this so much is because I feel like it ruins the whole thought process behind Soulsborne games, with them supposed to be challenging but fair. The combat makes it so that if you learn how to play the game and essentially just get good by analyzing attack patterns, improving your reaction to attacks, and overall just improving as a player. The problem with the enemy placement in DS2 is that it feels cheap and it artificially inflates the difficulty of its fights due to how overwhelming and unfair they are. Now onto the last topic of this video. Let's talk about this game's boss fights. The boss fights in this game are both fantastic and fucking horrible. Dark Souls 2 has 41 boss fights in total, which is much more than any mainline Dark Souls game. It really feels like the developers went for quantity over quality when they designed the bosses. A lot of them have awkward hitboxes, poorly telegraphed attacks, and boring uninspired movesets. And a lot of them were just very forgettable. Like, there were certain points throughout my playthrough where I genuinely couldn't remember the last boss I fought. Also, I don't want to beat a dead horse by bringing up the similarities between a good chunk of the bosses in this game, but like, some of these bosses do look a bit similar, bruh, let's be for real. Honestly, the bosses in Dark Souls 2 are just a mixed bag. There are some fantastic bosses in the game like Velstead and the Fume Knight, but it also has bosses like the Belfry Gargoyles, so yeah. I know I've spent most of this video shit talking Dark Souls 2, but I can't reiterate enough that I still think Dark Souls 2 is a good game. Despite the development trouble, the developers did the best they could and made what I consider a very enjoyable experience. And they did rectify some of the more egregious problems with the release of Scholar of the First Sin, along with 2 fantastic DLCs. But unfortunately, this failed to change DS2's position as the black sheep of the franchise. So is Dark Souls 2 a bad game? Well, the answer is obviously fucking no. We all know that it's not bad, but it might be a pretty bad Dark Souls game, if that makes sense. And that's the end of the video. Yep, video about Dark Souls 2 being bad. No one's done this before. Hopefully this video gets a lot of views and helpful, nice comments and no death threats, and everyone has calm, civilized discussions. I feel like I was very fair in this video, but maybe I wasn't. I don't know. This was my first time making a Dark Souls video apart from the fucking short I made like 5 days ago. But the main reason I made this video is to see how a Dark Souls vid would do on my channel. Because I do plan on making a Dark Souls 3 retrospective once I'm done with my exams, and I kind of want it to not fucking fail. I've made 3 real retrospectives. The first one did great views, fantastic watch time, like really good, but the other 2 fucking flopped, and that made me want to like do something that's not good. Yeah, so yeah, before I commit to making a big ass video like that again, I want to make sure that the subject matter at least gets some views. But yeah, videos have been doing great lately. Same old, same old. We're hitting 1K this year. Like and subscribe if you're still watching. You're the GOAT. Tell me that if you're still watching this, comment down what I said. Banana floop. Banana floop. Yeah, but this has been your boy Juga Young, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.